Hello, everyone. Hope all is going well. Thanks to you for joining our session today. If you're watching live or just referencing the recording, we'll give everyone a couple seconds to trickle in before we kick off. But just as a reminder, so everyone is aware, today we'll kind of be talking over different things around placement fees, low inventory fees, several other fees that Amazon has kind of pushed at us recently, and kind of throwing us a little curveball there, and how we can adapt to these fees and then use them in a way to provide an advantage to our brand in a way as well. I guess while we're waiting, James, where are you joining in from today?
I'm in Fort Worth, Texas,
Fort
at
Worth.
my warehouse, and it is hot.
It is. I'm in Dallas. It's so I understand. Yes.
You feel it.
Yes. Summer has decided it's arriving.
Some days it hails. I don't know. It could snow tomorrow. It could be 100 degrees tomorrow. Who
It
knows?
would. It literally wouldn't surprise me if it snowed tomorrow somehow. Well, it looks like we have some people trickling in. Hope y'all are doing well. Give everyone another minute or two. Great. I think we'll go ahead and kick off, and we'll see as people trickle in as they are. So thanks everyone for joining again, whether you're watching live or watching the recording. My name is Kenton. I work at IntentWise. I'm a customer success manager here. Just a little bit about me. I've been with IntentWise since the start of January. Previously worked at an agency in the Amazon space, so have some experience on the execution side of things as well. But really came over to IntentWise to help bring some of that knowledge to our agency and brand partners to really help utilize our platform better to optimize all things Amazon data, in the best way possible. IntentWise is an Amazon partner, and software provider in a couple of different spaces. We have three primary tools, one of them being our ad optimizer tool, which allows you to optimize all things Amazon, Walmart, Criteo ads, as well as support for Instacart, where we provide the ability to optimize bids through AI structures, automated rules, everything along those lines. We have an analytics solution, which allows you to bring in all of your different data points and visualize them through our different dashboard templates, different embedded dashboards, to kind of help you visualize your data in a much better way, since we know that can be difficult. And then we have an AMC solution that'll allow you to generate AMC reports without any SQL knowledge, which we know can be a big pain point. And I think it's really cool to see the expansion and focus that Amazon's been putting in on that side. Um, to kind of continue to push that there. So AMC is definitely a big focus for us as well. Um, James, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your company as well?
Sure. My name is James McConnell Jr. I have been in e-commerce spaces since about 2010. Started in the Amazon ecosystem in 2017. I started a 3PL in 2020. What a year. And then co-founded AMZ United in 2023 last year. So that is our events planning company. So been around a lot, worked with a lot of sellers, sold stuff myself, worked with some small sellers, medium sellers, aggregators, some of the largest sellers on Amazon. I'm an ops guy. So analytics, numbers, logistics, anything related to operations, that's kind of where I live. I like to joke that if you ask me anything about ads or creative, it's like I could probably speak on it, but I don't. That's not my wheelhouse. But you start talking about inventory and shipping and all of this stuff. That's kind of where my ears perk up.
Great. I appreciate it. Well, cool. Again, thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to be kind of talking through everything around fees, so low placement fees, uh, inventory fees, and all these different changes from a fees and inventories perspective that Amazon kind of has thrown at us over the last couple months, since kind of the start of the year, it feels like, and really breaking down how these fees are affecting sellers, the best way to approach these fees, and then kind of you can kind of turn them into a competitive advantage for your brand even by approaching them better than some of your competitors might be. So I guess to kick off, I think we can kind of start honing in on that low inventory fee, which James, I know you've done quite a bit of research and diving into. If you want to talk a little bit about the what you've been doing with that.
Absolutely. So I won't be going into extreme detail on here. I'm sure posts in various places will be the link to my article, but if you want to go there, kind of follow along, marketplaceprep.com/, low dash inventory dash fee, or just go to the blog. And I spent about 4 hours writing the article, but about 36 hours of math behind it. And the reason for that is, yes, you can go read the help pages on Amazon all you want. You can read what Amazon's relaying to sellers. But the unfortunate part is you need a tailored solution for your business. And the one caveat with all these fees is it isn't a one size fits all. There isn't an answer that I can say for this business and this business, or all businesses, it's going to be the same thing. Every business has its own nuances, just like ads, just like SEO, just like creative. Everyone has their own distinct differences. Well, your operations and the fees are going to be the same way. Um, Couple of the biggest misconceptions I've had conversations with people about is low inventory fees are one, they do not apply if you are out of stock. People think, well, if I run out of stock, I'm going to be charged fees. No, it's not an intuitive title. Um, Additionally, Amazon made some changes really in the past, I think, 2 or 3 weeks about adding some more conditions. So if you sell less than 20 units a week, you're exempt. If you, I think there's a few other conditions as well. I don't have those in the article because this was written at the very start of the release, but follow up on the help pages on Amazon. They have all the latest details. Ultimately, this is about how much stock you keep at Amazon on average. So if you sell 1 unit a day and you maintain about 45 days of stock in Amazon, probably going to be about 45 units. Amazon wants you to have more than 28 days at Amazon a majority of the time. So in general, we're talking averages. Yes, you can dip below that, but you don't want to dip below that for a sustained period of time. Otherwise, you're going to be charged fees. Now, one response I've heard is, well, just send in more inventory. Well, that's easier said than done. That costs more capital. That will cost you more planning and like what is more inventory? Well, what if you're about to sell a bunch because it's Q4 and stuff like that? Well, it takes a lot of understanding for your products, your seasonality, your trends, etc. Maybe you sell a lot more on the weekends. I don't know. Um, the other note is there's also so many exceptions. So the fee applies to the entire parentage of a listing. So if you have a parent ASIN and you have a size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or ABCD or whatever, or 5 colors, then now the data for that entire variation is what's being used to evaluate every single product in that. If you have one variation that's selling like crazy and it's bringing down the whole entire parentage, it might be wise to take that out temporarily, depending on what your supply chain looks like. It's nearly impossible for brands with large catalogs to be perfectly in stock 100% of the time. We all know that. But there are ways you can really look at it and say, hey, how can I optimize? And what I did, the hardest part of the article was doing the math and saying, hey, we know that the we do not want to stock a year's worth of inventory at Amazon. You're going to be nailed with long-term storage fees, surcharges, all that. And that's a lot of capital to tie up. We know that Amazon wants more than 28 days. Where is the middle bounds for that? So it's above 28, And honestly, you should probably be slightly above that because of buffers and like hiccups that can happen. But where is the upper bound? So I did the math and I said, okay, well, we have to balance storage fees. We have to balance the low inventory fees. We have to say, hey, there's long-term storage fees. There is inventory surcharges. There's a fee for a fee for a fee, whatever. We want to say if we run below 28 days and now we get charged this massive fee, well, I would much rather stock more than I need and not pay that massive fee because I want to find where those equal. So let's say the low inventory fee, if you start hitting that at the 28 day is 50 cents. Well, now you can compare that to how many days of inventory equals you incurring the same amount as that low inventory fee. Maybe that's 70 days. For a larger product, that might be a very narrow window of like, I don't know, 28 to 45 days. That's going to be a lot harder. But I can guarantee you right now, if I was selling a pen on Amazon, it's a very small product. Um, we are now able to send in over 100 days of inventory of a particular pen because it's really small and still pay less than running down to 28 days of inventory because low inventory fees are per unit and storage fees are per cubic foot. So you have to balance that for your inventory. A couple notes on that is you want to evaluate not only balancing out the fee and the storage fee with also the capital holding cost. Maybe your products are expensive and you're having a hard time keeping in stock. It might make sense to pay the low inventory fee, which is not ideal. It's a significant margin hit, but you are now getting that cash flow. If you can build up your cash flow and avoid the fee, great, you pay less in fees, but you also have more money tied up in inventory. Um, Another strategy I've spoken with a few sellers on is saying, hey, I can't get enough inventory. I don't have the capital. The supplier has delays. The manufacturing has delays. Whatever the case is, Amazon has delays because when doesn't Amazon have delays? Um, you can raise your prices when you start dipping below that 28-day threshold and start incurring those fees potentially. And say, hey, I'm going to raise my prices 50 cents. If the low inventory fee is 30 cents, I'm going to raise my prices 50 cents. That's going to cover the referral fee. That's going to cover the low inventory fee. You may still sell a bunch of units. Great. I know people that are doing that. And while they are not paying a ton in low inventory fees, they're covering it for the increased price and it's buying them time to get more inventory in. So maybe they need 2 weeks. Okay, they raise their price for 2 weeks. That's an option. So once again, it comes down to your inventory and your management of that. And then parentizing or deparentizing, orphaning listings. So say, hey, take a product in or out of a variation, I can have a major impact. There's a lot of talk about using AWD. AWD has very, very significant advantages and disadvantages. Once again, we've evaluated AWD for some clients and it is a disaster. We've evaluated it for other specific clients, very, very expensive small products with 100 units per case. It may work, but you're also leaving the control of that inventory up to Amazon. Not ideal. You have to also ship it to Amazon. So AWD, while it can solve it for some sellers, it's not for everyone. AWD can actually come out more expensive than many alternatives, depending on the product. Um, and then I think the one last thing about low inventory fees is um, don't justify paying a low inventory fee just because Amazon lowered FBA fees in April. Why, if I said, hey, I'm going to lower prices across the board for every single product, but we're going to have these potentially optional fees that you have the ability to mitigate. Well, those are two completely independent scenarios. I'm going to take the lower prices. Fantastic. The lowered FBA fees were great. But if I can also avoid the low inventory fees, why wouldn't I? And that kind of leads really well into placement fees as well. So many people are saying, hey, FBA fees lowered 20 cents. placement fees are costing me, I don't know, 25 cents or 20 cents, whatever it is, it's basically a wash. I'm just going to pay for placement fees. Well, why don't I make the same comment and say if they're going to lower prices here and I can reduce, I can say, hey, my placement fees are zero because I figured out ways to ship it more efficiently and all this stuff like that. Why wouldn't I? I would rather have a net decrease in fees, which sounds crazy in the Amazon world, but I've had conversations with a few sellers, especially some that are like a mid to higher volume, where the fees from earlier this year in January are actually more than what they're paying now. That's unheard of with Amazon. So now the people that are able to get to that point are incredibly good at watching their numbers and doing analytics and evaluating their inventory. Great. Uh, they get rewarded for that. But the people that are just ignoring it and saying, "Oh, the placement fees are just a wash for the lowered FBA fees, whatever," why not look into that? That's all I'm telling people and saying, "Hey, don't justify a fee for another fee when they're totally unrelated. If you can control both, fantastic."
Totally. I think that's
Um,
great. That's
yeah.
some great insight on the low inventory fee. I think it gives a good overview on some of the different approaches you can take. Seems like there's several different ways sellers can approach this, and it's definitely not a one size fits all situation. So I think that's where we linked your article in the chat for anyone who wants to reference that. There's definitely some good insight I think you guys can gather from there on what might be best for your situation, how you can evaluate it, how you can go through the math to evaluate what's best for your brand. So I think that's all great. I think the other thing that I noticed on there that is a little more nuancy and might provide some variance is I think you mentioned some things around new sellers. Do you mind touching on that for a couple minutes?
So if you launch a new product to FBA, they give you some grace with because it's very very hard to predict your forecast for a brand new product. But they give you some grace for like 180 days. We've also seen scenarios where exemptions were given for products that don't fit any exemption criteria. Don't know why. Not going to complain. Not going to ask because I'll take the exemption. But at the same time, you have to look at what your dashboard is and say, hey, I have 10 SKUs right now that are hitting the low inventory fee. What am I going to do now? And what am I going to do in the future to help mitigate that? Because I don't like paying more fees. If I can avoid that, great. And then also new sellers get a whole bunch of like benefits their first year. So if you're a brand new seller, not just a new product, but a brand new seller, you get a huge amount of benefits, lowered fees, ad credits, whatever they are right now. They're constantly adding more and changing more. Those can be very, very um, helpful, but at the same time, you have to plan for those benefits to go away eventually.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that touches on the other point that, it's not going to be a one size fits all solution across the board because there are even those examples of nuances. And I think from, just what I've seen from your research and article, even within a brand, it might not remain the same strategy across time, right? I think you mentioned some things around changes in Q4 and just different fees that are introduced in Q4. And I'm sure, we're still a little bit out, but it's going to be here faster than anyone realizes it. So I'm sure people are starting to plan around that type of front as well.
I would love to touch one more thing on the low inventory fee about Q4. One of the big concerns is what do I do about seasonal products? Because I want to sell out. I don't want to sell Christmas stuff in January. You'll get some, but like, what do I do? Send in your inventory earlier, and what you're going to do is overinflate your average and say, "Wow, you have 2,000 days of inventory in September." Okay, well now that number is going to start being used in your 90-day average. And October, you start selling a little bit more. But November, man, you're running low, and December, you sell out. Well, it doesn't matter because you had the September to kind of hold your weight up of that average. And you could potentially go through an entire Q4, assuming everything works out perfect, where you don't pay any low inventory fees. But the amount of planning that takes, it means sending an inventory sooner. It means forecasting for Q4 properly. It means restocking in Q4 at appropriate levels. Will you incur some more storage fees? Sure. On my article, I wrote a calculator that tells you an approximation, minor imperfections there, but an approximation saying, hey, you should stock between 29 and 75 days of inventory. Well, and a key component to that is there's also a Q4 button because we all know Q4 storage fees are insane. So now instead of paying, I don't know, 80 cents, you're now paying $2 a cubic foot. That's a big difference. So your range maybe was 29 to 100 days. Maybe it's now 29 to 75 days. You need to be able to evaluate for your inventory. Do I want to pay low inventory? Do I want to pay more in storage? Do I want to find a dynamic middle? How frequently can you send inventory into Amazon? Can you use AWD, but also evaluate AWD's cost? AWD is not just cheaper storage. You have to ship it to AWD. You have to get it there. You have to pay the storage. You have to pay an outbound per case fee and an outbound transportation fee, which is per cubic foot. It's not just, oh, it's $5 a box, $2 a box, whatever the number is, and it's transferred. You have to factor in all of those. And the number one thing most people forget is getting it to AWD. There's only 2 AWD warehouses in the entire United States. Maybe you're local, great, bonus. But if you're not, like me in Texas, both of them are far away from me. So if I'm going to ship to AWD, I need to factor in, I don't know, another 100, 200, 300 bucks a pallet, whatever, depending on the freight and stuff like that, to just get it there. And that actually wiped away a lot of the savings that it provided. So I store stuff offsite or in my warehouse. Um, it is a great tool, but once again, people need to evaluate their inventory and not just blindly say, oh, well, Amazon allows AWD to avoid all these fees. Yeah, and what are they incentivized to do? To fill their wallet. They're going to say whatever it takes to get stuff into their buildings because it makes them money. They don't care about your margin. Um, the other thing is AWD is because it's only 2 warehouses. People think, oh, I can send it to Amazon or whatever. Um, good luck getting it out of AWD. If you actually look at the SLAs and say, hey, I need to recall this inventory, uh, they can take their sweet time whenever they feel like it, basically. Their SLA to get something out of AWD, there isn't really a clear removal order process. There isn't shipment reconciliation built out for AWD, or at least last time I checked. It's a very rudimentary program right now, still. Like I said, still great opportunity, but be careful. Oh, and you can't do anything that has an expiration date at AWD. That wipes out all your grocery, supplements, a lot of beauty products, all that stuff can't even go there because it requires an expiration date. So for the sellers that are in, for example, beauty or supplements, it's not even an option. So you have to evaluate your inventory. How much are we sending in? How frequently are we sending it in? How many days of inventory are we maintaining? Because you don't have an alternative like AWD.
Totally. I think, I mean, it just shows the different considerations everyone needs to be taking into account, the different nuances that are coming into place. Whether that's, are you going to use AWD? Are you going to, how many weeks of cover are you going to have if you don't use AWD? What type of fees are you going to lean towards? Which work more for your business based off of your unit economics and things along those lines. I guess from your perspective, I know you mentioned your calculator on article. Is there anything else that you think is a helpful tool in helping sellers start evaluate what might be the best fit for their brand?
One, there is a very, very clear trend based on product size. So as a general rule of thumb for that calculator is the smaller your product, the more you should stock versus running low. When you start looking at larger products, it's a little bit different. I think oversize is excluded, but even larger standard size products, there's going to be a point where it's not going to be a huge difference. But like I said, if you're selling pens or anything that's small, be very careful with low inventory fees because sometimes you'd be better stocking way too much inventory than you're used to than paying those low inventory fees because they add up very quickly at the per unit level. But the best thing you can do is evaluate your best sellers first. Your top 5, 10, 20. I don't know what your catalog size is, but what's your the top 10% of your catalog. Make sure that you're not running too low, but also evaluating how much should you stock kind of on the max end. And if something happens, if there's a curveball, if an inbound shipment to Amazon gets delayed, which does happen all the time, that inventory does not count. It has to check in at Amazon for it to count for your low inventory fee calculations. If there's a delay that you cannot control, are you going to be able to weather the storm to get through it? Because I'm not planning for the perfection. Like perfection in Amazon is an oxymoron.
Definitely. Definitely. No, that all makes sense. I think that's all super beneficial for brands to start evaluating that. And then obviously, I think the other thing we touched on a little bit earlier that's causing a huge effect, not only low inventory fees, but we also saw placement fees come in at the same time, with the idea of needing to send into multiple different facilities, or you just take the placement fee and different things that you have to evaluate there. What have you kind of seen around that as you kind of looked through some evaluations there?
So March 1st at 6 p.m. Central Time is when the splits were activated, approximately 6 p.m. The reason I know that is we work with a software called ScanPower to create our shipments with the API. And we started studying how it was going to work. Because in January, we just were shipping as normal, shipping large volumes, all this other stuff. We did not know how exactly the splits were going to work, where it would go. Before we had multi-channel, multi-destination regions where most of your stuff would stay within a region. So if you were in the Northeast, they would all stay in the Northeast, and then they would divert out. This change said, nope, we're going to make you ship everywhere. So I'm in Texas. We were shipping to California, New Jersey, Illinois, even like South Carolina, like all these different locations. And now it's like, okay, how do we plan for this? How do we optimize it? And what is the most optimal method on average? Will there be exceptions? Absolutely. I will never say that no one should ever do placement because there are scenarios where it may make sense. But in my hundreds of like hours of analyzing, but also over 1,000 shipping plans of learning and studying the algorithm, they rarely are worth it. I have a 3PL, so I am directly incentivized to figure out ways to process shipments faster, and shipping cost doesn't really directly affect us. But I am also a seller, so I have to balance out, well, I want the cheapest both ways. How do I balance that? So I had to do the analysis. In our analysis for products, we found across 500,000 units and 25,000 SKUs, um, we came up with an average product size for most wholesale sellers. And I'll try to find that real quick. But the goal for me was is okay, most products that are standard size will fall into some sort of range, and I think it was like point like 1.5 or whatever cubic feet. We're not dealing with oversize here, so we'll stick to standard size. Some people have smaller products, some people have larger products. Um, then I did some testing. I said, okay, let's do a test shipment where we ship a very large quantity of physically small products. We're talking like a little beauty bottle or whatever. And let's also test a product that's kind of on the larger side, so above that average. And I took those two data sets, and the larger product first, the shipping cost with placement fee. That was another thing that we tested. We said we're going to test this all the way through. We're going to not only see what the placement fee would be, but also the shipping cost for a single split or single shipment a minimal split where you pay a little bit less in placement fees, but you're now splitting three ways, or the fully optimized splits, which is typically five splits. Sometimes we see less, sometimes we see up to seven, and then there's other variables at play as well. But we said, okay, let's not care about the labor of packing these products for 30 seconds. Let's care about purely which is the best cost wise between shipping and placement. So the larger product, which comes a little bit closer to being comparable, the one destination plan cost about $5,100. I was like, okay, that's a starting point. That included shipping, which was, I don't know, 2.5 grand. Placement fees were about 2.5 grand. I can't remember the exact number of units, but I think that was around 6,000, 6 to 7,000 units. The placement with partial splits ended up being cheaper at about $3,400. Once again, this includes the shipping and the placement fee all combined. I was like, okay, we're down over $1,000, over $1,500. And then the no placement plan, $0 placement fee, and five splits, the most labor intensive in the warehouse side, was less than $2,500. So a lot of people are saying, well, just pay the placement fee, we'll factor it into our margins. Okay, well, if I could do the same thing but make more margins, I'm going to do it. I don't want to just factor it into my margins. I want to like figure out how to increase my margins. So why would I want to pay nearly double, which by the way, the labor to do five shipments was not $2,500. It was much less than that. I don't know the exact, but I would much rather do five splits. And people say, well, it doesn't work for all products. Okay, well, let's try a really, really small product. The larger product was $2,500 difference, not a big deal. The smaller product, which was about a 60,000 unit shipment, real world scenarios, these are products that sell really well. The one destination shipment cost $21,000 to ship. That's huge. The partial splits brought it down to 12,500, and the five-way splits brought it down to 3,800. That is significant. And the reason being is that placement fees are per unit. So a smaller product, you can ship more in a smaller amount of space, in a smaller box, etc. And the caveat to this is people are like, well, we're getting in situations where we have to pay a placement fee because we're using Seller Central, you're shipping in two cases. We don't even have that choice. That's where the API comes in. Amazon designed the API to operate completely differently than the Seller Central workflow. The Seller Central workflow is called Send to Amazon, and the API, I just call it the API workflow. I'm sure there's a technical name behind it, but the Seller Central workflow says, hey, tell us what you're sending, tell us how you're packing it, then we will decide how it splits, which is a completely normal workflow. The API workflow says, tell us what you're shipping, we'll tell you where to ship it, then pack it. We don't care how you pack it. And they are completely compliant no matter how you do it. But they change how you process your inventory. So with the Send to Amazon workflow, you may have three cases of a product and it splits three different ways. Well, you might be getting hit with placement fees because you don't have enough number of cases. And you may not even have the option to split it five ways and not pay the placement fees because you're limited by they're not going to split a case. With the API, once again, fully compliant. You can look at the developer documentation, but probably not that bored. The API says, hey, we just need to know what you're shipping, and then we'll decide how it splits from there. Cool. Your settings on your backend set to optimize. It's going to split it most likely five ways. However, none of those shipments are going to have placement fees, and you get to pack it however you want. You can still do some case packs with the API. So, an example, I had two cases of a product I wanted to ship in from a vendor location. I could have done it through Send to Amazon, which would have cost me $46 in placement fees plus shipping. I did it through the API, specifically through ScamPower. I just paid shipping, no placement fees, and we've tested this over and over. And Amazon's completely fine with that because it's a different workflow. Now I'm saving $46 on a small shipment. Well, imagine multiplying that out by hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of products. It adds up substantially. So one, evaluate the API tools out there. There's ScamPower, there's a bunch of others. It's just what we use. And it will change how you look at not only processing it in a warehouse, prep center, 3PL, but also what you can potentially do to save on those placement fees. The other component is thinking about those placement fees as other sellers are used to paying those now. Many sellers are. If I can knock off 20 cents, 30 cents, 50 cents of fees for my product, but my competitors are now paying that, that may not seem like much, but for a product that's selling, I don't know, 1,000 units a month, that's $500 more dollars. You can put into more ads, you can do it in more marketing, you can put into your own pocket for all I care. There are ways to optimize it. A lot of the tools out there, there's a lot of they operate the same way. With one component, be very, very careful with gaming the system. Amazon shut down some loopholes that are available in the API. We don't want to be abandoning shipments. We don't want to be gaming the system in a way that's kind of saying, hey, we're able to save a whole bunch on placement fees because we found this loophole. I would not recommend loopholes right now. Amazon's aware of them. They will probably charge you. If they don't, great, you got lucky. But at the end of the day, we want to be careful with those. However, a lot of larger sellers that are kind of separated from their logistics process, hey, we outsource to a 3PL, they just handle it. They're just using Seller Central, which is much less flexible than the API.
Totally. I think that all sounds great. I think, like you're saying, the API seems like it has great potential, but it's always something you have to be careful with. If it seems, I think, it goes back to the classic advice. It seems too good to be true. It might be. So there's probably no way to completely get around any additional cost. It seems like with this, but definitely some ways you can minimize it and optimize it for your brand. I saw one comment from someone talking about, which software tools are the best, which ones we prefer. I know you mentioned ScanPower is one that you use, and it
Mm-hmm.
seems like that can offer great solutions. But I think, just in general, when it comes to software tools in this space, there's lots of options out there, and it comes down to evaluating what's the best fit for your brand. So I think that would be, a lot of my recommendation as you're thinking about what's best. I'm sure there's other tools that provide the same type of API login into these different shipment APIs. How can you evaluate that and what's best for your brand? So.
Every For those that don't understand how the API works, API is really just the language software uses to talk with Amazon. Everyone has to speak the same language, whether it's intent wise, whether it is ScamPower, whether it is another software. They're all using the API in like the same calls, the same functions, the same language. Now, what buttons you can press in your user interface, that'll depend on the software you use, and that's obviously dependent on your business. They may have certain features or whatever, but they're all speaking the same language, which means they can all do the same thing, assuming the buttons are there. Um, but yes, you have to evaluate it for your business. I just want people to really evaluate this in a sense that don't blindly just justify the placement fees by the lower FBA fees, because if a seller who's selling, I don't know, 200,000 units a year, 100,000 units a year, and I say, hey, let's just not pay the placement fees, and you'll probably spend a tiny bit more on shipping, sure, but you're not paying the placement fees, and you end up saving $30,000, $20,000 that year. That's a huge amount of money. That is maybe not a full time salary, but depending on the size of the company, that could be an entire salaried position, um, or a nice little bonus paycheck at the end of the year. So you
Definitely.
have to evaluate it for your inventory. You have to evaluate it for how your inventory is getting to Amazon, whether you're using a 3PL, prep center, your vendors doing it, you're doing it in house, you're doing it in your I don't know, your garage. Doesn't matter. You need to evaluate it for your specific situation. Um, but also understand that there are multiple ways to create a shipment. If you create it in Seller Central, there's a lot of rigidity there. If you create it in software, you can actually have more flexibility because the splits are different. They do not split the same way. And maybe you can pack things faster that way. Maybe you can actually save money on shipping. Um, there are plenty of scenarios where, hey, if you do the same exact shipment in Seller Central, you'll pay more money in shipping cost. It depends. But yes, it is easier to ship one shipment, but make sure you're understanding at what cost that is costing you. Because I know a ton of 3PLs that are actually forcing, especially some of the larger like corporate 3PLs that work with like $1 billion companies. They're like, this is too complicated. Please turn on placement. Well, okay, you're doing 100 units a month, not a big deal. Well, what if you're doing 100,000 units a month? Like, that's an expense. Now you basically have to factor that into your 3PL bill, even though it's going through Amazon, saying, hey, are they shipping it in the most cost effective manner for you? Because once again, they are not incentivized to save you money on the shipping. They want to make margin on labor. But there's a fine balance between that. There's a winning for the brand, there's a winning for the 3PL. Everyone can work together on that. But if you are just blindly leaving that up to whatever Amazon decides to ship or split or whatever, well, that's like saying, "Oh, this is one of my favorite email like quotes that I thought of a while back. For those who understand ads, we all know Amazon loves to send their own ad recommendations, which I would say in 99.9% of scenarios, their suggestion is to raise bids. Because why not? Spend more money with Amazon. Okay. People are treating placement fees as the same way. They're saying, well, Amazon just said to do it this way, and I got to pay the fees. It is what it is. That's effectively saying, Amazon told me to spend more on ads, so I guess I just have to spend more on ads. What? Will there be scenarios where they could be right? Maybe in like 0.1% of scenarios. But in most scenarios, I highly recommend evaluating it for your business. Test shipments on minimal placement, uh, three-way splits, or fully optimized, both in Seller Central and in the API because they're different. They're different algorithms. Then do a full comparison and say, hey, do a real shipment too. I've seen a lot of people use kind of just like throw together random products or 50 of this, 100 of that, 2,000 of that. Cool. Do a real shipment of real product. The examples that I did were shipments that were, we didn't necessarily create them because we were testing, but it was realistic examples of products that sold at that volume and said, hey, these products, we want to evaluate not only our true cost, because I need to know how much do I need to budget for shipping now, because that changed. My shipping cost increased 945% on March 1st. So trust me, I needed to know that. But I needed to know what that number was. Was it going to be double? Was it going to be triple? Was it going to be 20x? We saw some scenarios where it increased 20 or 200, no, sorry, 2,100% increase in shipping cost for certain sellers. There's others that only increase double. Lucky for them. But once again, look into your own inventory, spend the time to analyze. It'll be worth it because you will learn ways to save a whole lot of money on these placement fees.
Totally. I think those are all great points in terms of evaluating how, making sure you're doing it in the best way for your brand. Because again, it's like we saw with the low inventory fees. It can't be a one size fits all situation. And I think you have a unique perspective on it, coming from both the 3PL side and the brand side. And so I think it gives perspective on balancing it. And I definitely think you're right on the whole, finding that extra margin, even if it's only a couple, 20, 30 cents a unit, while it may seem a lower significance, on a 1 unit scale, as that adds up over time, that can either go back to your margin or that can become an advantage for you. I can go in, I have an extra $10,000, $20,000 to spend on ads this month. I have,
Exactly.
this to pour into new product development. Like that, this can become your advantage for growing past your competitors on Amazon who aren't taking the time to evaluate, spend, even taking the extra work to create multiple shipments, working with different partners to help execute that.
The sad part is Amazon said all these placements and all these splits are saying, "Oh, we're gonna get stuff to customers faster and less transfers." As of today, that is a complete lie, effectively. When I split to 5 places, let's say I have California, Illinois, New Jersey, South Carolina, and Texas. Let's just say they all go there. Every single split will probably have some units of every SKU. I have a dozen SKUs in a shipment, some will go to each place. But every single destination will now FC transfer to the entire United States. We have had scenarios where we ship a product to Texas and New York, and the New York shipment ends up transferring back to Texas, and the Texas shipment transfers to New York. Why Amazon? It's Amazon, but it's not speeding up transfer times. It's not speeding up time to the customer. Purely a way to just take more fees from sellers. So I don't want people to be like taken for granted, not taken for granted, but like taking their money basically because it's not really doing anything right now. Could things change? Hopefully, but I, it's something to also consider. Um, Couple other things that people really should consider, and this can be factored in on both the wholesale side, but also the brand development side, is really evaluate your packaging. A lot of this stuff, now we're talking about shipping more places. We want to ship products in the smallest packaging possible. Evaluate your products box. Can it be thinner? Can it be into a different size bracket? There's so many fee brackets now that if you can cut off 1 ounce of a product's weight, you could be in another fee bracket. There's another 20 cents. Now you save 20 cents on low inventory fees, 20 cents on placement fees, 20 cents in FBA fees. That's 60 cents. Now that's a lot of money. Another thing too is a lot of people think about their product size, but they do not think about how their case pack size is. We've had very large sellers, some of some very well known sellers too. I won't mention their names, but very well known sellers who kind of two scenarios. One, optimize their case size, not just to be, oh, we can fit 49 pounds in the box, but how does it palletize? How does it ship? How much of a pallet does it actually use up? Well, these pallet perfectly, it's all square. There's very little air gaps. Great, you've maximized that pallet. We've also had scenarios where they're shipping in a 24 by 24 by 24 box. Compliant, yes, but you can only fit 2 of those boxes per layer on a pallet. Well, now you're going to be paying more in the shipping, which is a lot more important these days, per pallet than if you were to just use a 24 by 20, which can do 4 per pallet, 4 per layer. Don't just think about your product size in terms of a QB scan and FBA fees and stuff like that, but also think about how will it pack in a case? How will it palletize? Because if I ship a pallet that's 6 feet tall, or a stackable one that's maxed out, and there's no air gaps, I've maxed it out. I've now shipped more for less for the same amount of money than if you were to ship the same exact pallet and there was a giant gap on the side that was, I don't know, 6 feet wide or 6 inches wide. Well, that you're paying for that space. Whether you use it or not is up to you. And a lot of people can redesign their cases, um, even their products on how they're packed. Stacking, a good example is if you have a 2 pack of color pencils, for example, that might be an inch tall. But if you can put them next to each other, it makes it wider, but now it's under, let's say, a half an inch. You're now in a totally different fee bracket. The same product, oriented differently, has a different fee. Once again, 50 cents, 20 cents. We've now identified probably 3 or 4 areas that we can save, I don't know, a quarter. And in a worst case scenario, that's potentially adding over $1 margin per unit. That can be the entire margin for some products that are very low cost, very inexpensive, physically small, whatever, and you've effectively just doubled it. A lot of people like to say, "Hey, I'm just seeing what the fees show me," instead of understanding what can I do to reduce them. And you have to reduce every fee that you can control. Can I send in less inventory and pay less storage fees? Can I send in more inventory and not pay low inventory fees? Can I pay less in FBA fees? Ads, I'll leave to the ad experts out there because that's not my specialty. But it feels like hundreds of other fees that you can look at that most people just accept and ignore. And it's like, it is what it is. It's like, why don't you evaluate how to look at those? Um, but things are constantly changing. I could almost bet money that by the end of the year, there'll probably be another fee change. And what happens every single time is I analyze it. We were analyzing how to handle these splits. We didn't know exactly how they work, but we had a theory starting last year. We were analyzing some of these fee changes early this year that weren't hitting until April or May. Don't analyze them 2 months after they get released when you're in a complete panic. When they announce something, start learning it. That way you're prepared and you can do things like the low inventory fee. We need more inventory for the low inventory fee. I knew that at the beginning. I didn't know exactly how it would work, but I knew I needed more inventory. So guess what I started doing in January? I started stocking up, stocking up. I couldn't stock up to where I needed right away, capital, but I planned ahead for every single fee. And when that low inventory fee hit, I wasn't concerned. But the Facebook groups, the forums, the amount of podcasts and all this other stuff of people like, we don't understand, we don't know what to do, we're in complete panic. I had probably hundreds of phone calls. It feels like of people like, I don't know how to do this. I was like, I started planning for this in January. Next time there's a fee change, which I 100% guarantee you there will be a fee change some point, plan ahead. Plan when they announce it, not when they release it. But yeah, I hope that's not too overwhelming and evaluate your inventory.
I think those are all great points, and you're right. If I think we have to expect that we're going to continue to see this happen. We're going to continue to see changes, whether it's the fees that we've already seen, different fees, changes in existing fees, and it's going to have to be something that we continue to evaluate within individual SKU economics. How are we going to see this affect our brand? How can we then take this and use it as an advantage for our brand by lowering our fees and everyone else's fees are going up? How can we, adjust and adapt? So planning for it is definitely, I think, a good step. And I think it's something we see across the board with Amazon, whether it's ads or product launches, content, shipping, and fees. I think all of this requires just that time to plan ahead and prepare because we know Amazon's an ever changing landscape. So I think we have a couple minutes left. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. But James, one last question I had: is there anything else that you've seen brands do just to give them an advantage over their competitors, or how have they taken advantage when they're using these different changes, as you kind of talked through, to get their fees a little bit lower? Is there anything else that you've seen brands using with this extra margin or doing to get that advantage over competitors in their category?
So an example, the friend of mine who sells who ended up with a net lower fee after doing all of his analysis. He specialized at the time in small and light, which is now just called low price products. The reason that he benefits more than most is that most of his products are, let's just say, under $15. He's got ones that are above, but let's just say most of them are under $15. Saving 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 cents on a $15 product, we're talking entire margin percentage points now. Not like, oh, it's not going to make a difference. No, like we're talking 1%, 2%, 3% or more margin on their products if they can figure out how to save just the slightest bit. So his low price products, he likes to sell physically small and pretty cheap things in very high volume. 30 cents a unit times, let's just say it's 100,000 units. I don't know exactly, but 100,000 units is a massive difference for him rather than a person that's selling $100 products. Like, oh, we saved 20 cents on $100. Okay, whatever. 20 cents on a $10 product times 10,000 units a month, 5,000 units a month, it's a much different story. So the other thing is a lot of operators know how to maintain their business, but don't know how to kind of push the boundaries of like, what can we change? Because a lot of people are changing their creative, their ads, all this other stuff, because that's constantly dynamic and figure out new ways, but they're not doing it to their operations. There are a million ways to do ads, and it feels like there's a new way every single week. Whether it's, I don't know, you're talking about AMC, all the DSP stuff, there's so much with video right now. That's constantly inspiring people to do new things with advertising. But with operations, logistics, inventory, um, really their supply chain component, it's very reactive. With marketing, oh, let's think about new ways for the future. With operations, we got to clean up the past and clean up and adjust. And what if you applied the same philosophy to from marketing of how can we improve, how can we change, how can we adapt? Who can we connect with? Have a call, have a meet at a conference, meet at a meetup, whatever it is, to talk on what do we need to do on our operations side to treat it as an innovation area instead of a cost center. Because people say, oh, it's just going to be a cost. And then it is what it is. Well, the most important lesson I want people to walk away from really in this whole thing is which is easier, increasing your sales 10% or increasing or decreasing your cost 10%. Because if you decrease your cost 10%, 100% of that savings goes to your margin. If you increase your sales 10%, well, you're not going to get 10% more in your margin because now you have more in referral fees, more in other fees and stuff like that. So you may be only increasing 5, 6% or whatever. But if you can save even 10 cents, that 10 cents goes directly into your pocket with no fees attached. Oh, except the IRS, but we can ignore them for this.
No, I think that's a great way to summarize. And I think, we talked about that can then go back straight to your margin, go into your pocket, or it can go and apply in other ways. Use it for ads, use it to test new creatives, all these other things that are, hot topics that people are working through. So I think that's a great way to summarize. Obviously, there's lots of things to do with the fees that are already out there, lots of ways brands can adjust if they haven't already. But really thinking about this proactively planning for the future so that you can be ready for when this inevitably comes around again, I think is a real key here. So I think that's a great point to end on. I appreciate everyone who was able to join today. If you want to learn more about IntentWise, you can visit our website, find us on LinkedIn or intentwise.com or IntentWise on LinkedIn. You could email me directly at kenton@intentwise.com. Happy to talk about how IntentWise could service your brands or your agencies, not only with things around like inventory fees and how we can use our analytics tools to help you service that, make sure you know all the fees you're being charged, get an in-depth view into that, but also things around, ad optimizations, ad changes around marketing cloud, things like that. And James, I know you have several places that people can find you as well. So if people want to learn more from you, they want to connect with you, how can they find you?
Absolutely. I tend to be in kind of a few different places. Facebook or LinkedIn via my name, Instagram via James Universe. Obviously, my blog, marketplaceprep.com. That's my 3PL. You can reach out there, and then kind of as a bonus, we have an event in August called AMZ United. While it is primarily focused towards wholesale sellers, we had a very successful event last year. We have an incredible lineup. In fact, entire sections around operations sessions, which applies to any seller and saying, hey, yes, there are going to be some topics that maybe not be relevant for everyone, but everyone is interested in saving money, paying less in fees, um, figuring out ways to optimize their business, however that looks. So that'll be in August, amzunited.com. But other than that, I appreciate your time, and I hope this was helpful for your audience, and hope people can walk away probably having to do a lot of stuff with spreadsheets, but leading to saving money.
Totally. No, I appreciate it, James. I appreciate you taking the time to share all your knowledge, and I appreciate everyone who joined this, whether live or watching the recording, to and taking your time to kind of dive into this, and hope you take something valuable out of it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.